there, it's Christy, your friendly online speech language pathologist and specialist in children's communication, which includes behavior as well as other forms of communication like talking or using visuals or using gestures. There's so many things involved in communication that I cannot list them all in just one little snippet. So keep that in mind. Any way that someone helps someone else understand what they're thinking or what they want, that is communication. Today, I promised in my last video that we would talk next about engagement. And I realized that before we can really get into engagement, we need to talk about regulation a little bit. Regulation, I talked about a good deal when I was going through the sensory modalities series that we just finished. Regulation is a state that enables us to be calm, to be available for interaction, to be available for learning, and to be available for engagement. Engagement is a curious interest and a willingness to interact with the world around us. How can you tell that a child is engaged? Well, a child who has an autism spectrum disorder might not look you right in the face and ask to play the game. A child with an autism spectrum disorder might sidle up to you and look at you out of the corner of her eye. That might be an invitation to play for that particular child. Another child might simply wait without doing any of the other behaviors that he might usually do. Perhaps he's usually a rocker and a flapper to help himself stay calm. But when you get out a specific toy, this child stops and waits to see what you're going to do. That is a child who is available for interaction and who has a curious interest in the world. Today I want to discuss, so now that we know what engagement is, now that we know what regulation is, let's discuss some reasons why a child might not be regulated and ready for engagement. The first one, of course, we've talked about for the last many weeks is sensory needs that aren't being appropriately met. This is the biggest one that I see in my practice, in my classrooms, in other people's classrooms, in families' homes. It is that people don't know how to meet the sensory needs of their child. They don't know how to recognize the sensory needs of their child, and then they don't know how to meet them. So I recommend going back and looking at all the videos in that playlist that I will put up there. I also have some good books listed in the description box below the video, so please head on down there and get yourself some great resources. Keep in mind, I'm a speech language pathologist. I do have a lot of experience with sensory techniques as they aid communication and child development in general, but I'm not an occupational therapist, and those are the traditional professionals who work with kids on sensory things. So please get yourself a sensory smart occupational therapist. I have a link down below where you can look for one in your area. The reason why I talk about sensory stuff on this channel so much and everywhere else I go is because it is really, really important, and it's difficult in all areas of the world to find specialists in this area who really know what they're doing. And in some areas it's impossible. And if you're one of those people who is looking and not able to find someone, then at least you can educate yourself and you can be a help to your child who needs some more sensory input. If a child is not getting his or her sensory needs met, it's going to be really difficult to regulate and therefore to be ready for engagement. Think about this. If you have some sort of physical discomfort, maybe you have a really bad stomach ache, maybe you have a really bad headache, maybe you just have a rash that's really itchy. If you have any of these things going on, it's very difficult to have an honest, authentic interaction with another human being because you're pretty much thinking about that thing that's wrong with you, and it's taking up a lot of your bandwidth. That, I think, is how it is for many of these kids with sensory issues. And adults too. We only have so much capacity, and if 80% of it is taken up by an unmet sensory need, then we only have 20% to function. And that's not enough to function well and to have an engaged relationship with another human being. Another thing we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about why kids might not be engaged is that they might have a cognitive limit. For example, I have some limits that I can only take so many words broadcast at me in a certain span of time. Yesterday, I was at my niece's school. I don't know, it's kind of like a festival where all the students show off their work from the year and they do a performance, and it's adorable. There was a lot of talking and a lot of noise, and when I got home, I did not want more noise and more talking. I think you can probably relate. If you've gone to a party and you've talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, and you have exhausted your words, you've used them all up, and you don't wish to talk anymore. In fact, it's hard to think of what else you could possibly say. You possibly have already said everything there is to say in the entire world. Now, we know this is not true, but that's how it feels at the time. We all have a certain capacity. Some of us have a small capacity in certain areas. Some of us have a larger capacity in certain areas. This is true for children as well. Some children can take a lot of verbal input and they can understand it all, they can process it all and save it for later and learn from it. Some kids need information broken down into very small chunks and they need it repeated a lot of times. Like most of our kids with autism or with other developmental disabilities or differences, words can be a hard thing. There is a communication aspect to this difference in learning style, and it makes it much more difficult sometimes to comprehend verbal input, but also to break down what the words mean individually and then put them together and understand them as they're coming in, which is called receptive language, and also put them together as they're going out, which is called expressive language. This is an area where some of our kids have a small capacity, and we need to keep that in mind when we're trying to interact with kids. They're not going to do as well typically if we bombard them with language as they are if we use short phrases, maybe even just one word at a time. This is kind of along this third thing that I want to talk about today is kind of along the sensory path, but it is slightly different. Our kids can usually be divided into those who are easily understimulated and those who are easily overstimulated. The understimulated kids tend to be kind of floppy and they tend to be kind of a little less responsive. They seem kind of draggy and droopy, and a lot of times they actually move as if their joints are kind of not connected. Our easily overstimulated kids tend to be kind of tense and stiff, and sometimes will even have a high voice most of the time because their whole body is kind of extra tense. This difference, this individual difference, we need to keep in mind at all times when we're working with any child. One of the ways that we keep this individual difference of being more sensitive to stimulation and less sensitive to stimulation, one of the ways we keep this in mind and manage it wisely is that we notice when a child is getting too slouchy and wobbly and disengaging, and we ramp up our energy level. We bring out instruments, we wear a hat, we move our arms around a lot, and we talk in a variety of voices. Maybe we talk really quick, softly, maybe we talk really loudly. We do a lot of variation, a lot of movement, a lot of enthusiasm, because that's going to rev up this kid who needs a little boost. The child who's very easily overstimulated, however, we're going to do exactly the opposite. We're going to try to be as stable and soothing as possible. We're going to try not to have these drastic changes in volume or facial expression or movements. We're going to try to do slow movements instead of fast, zippy movements. We're going to pretend as if we're trying to soothe this child, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. Your eyebrows, my eyebrows anyway, happen to be very expressive. I talk with my eyebrows a lot and they move around. So I notice if my eyebrows are moving around a lot, that probably means that I'm being very expressive. And for these kids who need a more soothing environment, I need to calm down my eyebrows. These are just some thoughts to keep in mind as you are pondering the topic of how regulation looks for your child. Pretty much for every child, every person, it's going to mean that the person is not having trouble controlling herself. The person is not having difficulty with a behavior at that time, is not having a sensory need that's unmet. You know when you see a calm child. And you know when you see a not calm child, also known as dysregulated. We need to do all we can to help these kids get regulated, get back to their equilibrium, because no one likes being out of control. No one does. I don't like it. You don't like it. Our kids don't like it. We all want to be in control of ourselves because that's where all the fun happens. And so the first thing, of course, we want to do is we want to make sure that the child's sensory needs are being met. So once again, go back and watch that series if you haven't already. And then we're going to do some adaptations to our environment, and we're going to teach some coping strategies. And that will also help our kids with their regulation so that they are ready for engagement and for learning and interacting on an interpersonal level. That is all for this video. Come back next time and we're going to talk about the next steps in helping our kids stay calm and regulated. Have a great week. See you soon.